Chapter 1. I paid my parents' mortgage every month for 3 years quietly, automatically, without anyone thanking me, and the night my family praised my sister for that sacrifice, I realized something was very wrong. My name is Laura, and I was always the stable one, the reliable one, the person who kept everything running until the moment I stopped staying quiet and let the truth speak for itself in a room full of people who never expected it. The dining room always smelled the same on Sunday nights: roasted chicken, steamed vegetables, and the faint citrus cleaner my mother used on the table just before we arrived. It was a smell I associated with routine, with showing up on time, with being the dependable one. The house sat on a quiet street outside Beaverton, Oregon, a place that looked calm from the outside and functioned smoothly as long as no one disturbed the pattern. I arrived 5 minutes early as usual. My sister Megan was already there, leaning against the counter, laughing with my mother Diane about something that had happened at her office. My father Thomas sat at the table, scrolling through his phone, nodding along. No one looked up when I set my keys down. That was normal. Megan worked in corporate law, the kind of job people like to mention at family gatherings. Diane always introduced her as my daughter, the attorney, her voice lifting slightly on the last word. When people asked about me, the tone changed. "This is Laura. She keeps everything running." That was the phrase, keeps everything running, as if I were a background process no one noticed until it failed. We sat down to eat. Plates were passed. Diane asked Megan about a case she was working on, something about a merger and a difficult client. I listened and nodded, even though I barely followed the details. When the conversation turned to me, it lasted less than a minute. Diane asked if work was still busy. I said yes. She nodded and turned back to Megan. I had learned a long time ago not to interrupt. I learned to wait, to fill the gaps, to make sure nothing went wrong. I was the one who remembered birthdays, who called to schedule repairs, who picked up groceries when someone forgot. I was the one who handled problems quietly. Being reliable became my personality because it was the only role that never got questioned. Halfway through dinner, Diane set her fork down and sighed in a way that meant she was about to say something important. She looked at Megan with a soft smile and said how proud she was, how impressive it was that Megan had built such a strong career, how reassuring it was to know one of her daughters had really made something of herself. Then she looked at me. She said I had always been the steady one, the one who kept things from falling apart. She said that was valuable too, but not in the same way. Megan shined. I kept things running. The words were calm, almost affectionate, but they landed with a familiar weight. I had heard variations of them my entire adult life. Thomas shifted in his chair, but did not say anything. Megan smiled awkwardly, as if she did not know where to put her hands. I stared at my plate and waited for the moment to pass. It did not. Diane kept talking this time about the house, about how lucky they were to have it, how stressful it had been when things were tight a few years back, and how grateful she was that Megan had helped them get through the paperwork and the financial side of things. She mentioned it casually, as if it were common knowledge. My Aunt Linda chimed in from across the table, saying it was wonderful that Megan had stepped up like that not every family had a child willing to help their parents financially. She said it with pride, as if repeating a story she had told before. Something in me went very still. I looked up from my plate. I did not raise my voice. I did not interrupt. I waited for a pause that never quite came, then spoke anyway. I said that if Megan had been helping with the house, then she could start paying the mortgage from now on. The table went silent. No one laughed. No one corrected me. Diane stared at me as if I had spoken in a foreign language. Thomas looked down at his hands. Megan blinked clearly, trying to figure out whether I was joking. Diane asked what I meant, her tone sharp, now defensive. She said this was not the time to make things awkward. She said we were just talking. I repeated myself, still calm. I said that if Megan was the one supporting them financially, then it made sense for her to handle the payments going forward. Megan opened her mouth, then closed it again. She looked at my parents, waiting for one of them to explain. Thomas cleared his throat and said nothing. Diane frowned and said I was being dramatic, that there was no reason to turn dinner into a confrontation. I pushed my chair back and stood up. My legs felt heavy, but my hands were steady. I said I was tired and that I needed to go. Diane said we were not done talking. I said I was. No one followed me to the door. The drive back to my apartment took 20 minutes. The sky was dark, the streets nearly empty. I expected to feel angry, but what I felt instead was exhaustion. The kind that settled into your bones after years of holding something up alone. When I got home, I set my bag down and kicked off my shoes. I did not turn on any lights. I walked straight to the small kitchen counter where I usually charged my phone and picked it up. There was a notification waiting. Mortgage payment processed. I opened my banking app and stared at the transaction. Same amount as always. Same date. The automatic payment I had set up years ago had gone through without hesitation, just like it always did. I stood there longer than necessary, my thumb hovering over the screen. The house was quiet. No one was asking me to fix anything. No one was praising anyone else. It was just me and the proof of what I had been doing in silence. For the first time, I understood that what had happened at dinner was not a misunderstanding or a careless comment. It was the result of a story that had been told so often it no longer needed facts. A story where my role was invisible because it was convenient. I locked my phone and set it down. I did not cry. I did not call anyone. I just stood there and breathed, realizing that this was not a momentary lapse in patience. It was the point where something fundamental had shifted, and I could no longer pretend that staying quiet was the same as keeping the peace. Chapter 2. I left the kitchen dark that night, but I did not go to bed. I made tea. I did not drink and stood by the window with my phone in my hand, staring at the payment that had just gone through like it was a message I could finally read in plain English. It had not started as some grand sacrifice. It started the way most quiet bargains do, with a phone call that sounded like concern and ended like an obligation. Back in 2016, my parents bought that house in Beaverton after selling the smaller place we grew up in. They said it was their last move, their settle-down house, the kind of suburban comfort they had always wanted. I remember walking through it the first time, the new carpet smell, the open kitchen, my mother already talking about holiday dinners like the future was guaranteed. I was 33 then. I had a steady job with benefits, but I was not rolling in money. I was careful. I budgeted. I lived in an apartment and drove a car I had paid off. I had a life that made sense on paper. My sister Megan was in law school at the time, full of ambition and long nights and the kind of confidence that makes people want to bet on you. My parents talked about her like she was already a success story. She just has that spark, my mother would say. She is going places. No one ever said that about me. They said I was practical. They said I was dependable. They said I would be fine. The first few years after they bought the house, everything seemed normal. My father still worked. My mother kept her part-time job at the library. They paid the mortgage like they were supposed to. They never asked me for anything, which was part of why I never suspected how quickly that normal could shift. Then, in early 2019, my father called me on a weekday afternoon. He said, "Laura, can you talk for a second?" I was sitting at my desk at work with a spreadsheet open, a shipping cost variance I had been trying to trace back to a vendor error. I rolled my chair away from the aisle and lowered my voice. I said, "What is it?" He cleared his throat the way he did when he wanted to sound calm. He said, "I am thinking about retiring sooner than I planned. My back is not what it used to be. The commute is getting harder. I do not know how much longer I can keep it up." I asked if he had talked to Mom. He said she knows. "We are just figuring things out." There was a pause. Then he said something that made my stomach tighten. He said, "The mortgage is bigger than what we had before. If I stop working now, we might be a little tight until we adjust." A little tight. That was his favorite phrase. It meant not catastrophic, but not comfortable. It meant someone would need to make up the difference without calling it a bailout. I said, "How tight?" He hesitated. He said, "Maybe a few hundred a month? Maybe more some months. We do not want to worry your sister. She has enough on her plate." I did not answer right away. I could already hear the shape of the request forming. I said, "What are you asking me?" He exhaled. He said, "Just for a while, could you help us cover part of it? It would only be temporary. You know we would never ask if we had another choice." I remember looking at the numbers on my screen and thinking how easy it was to move money on a spreadsheet compared to real life. On paper, shifting a few $100s looked simple. In a family, it became a story. It became leverage. It became a role you could not step out of once you accepted it. I said, "Okay, we will figure it out." That night, my mother called me. Her voice was soft, almost cheerful, as if she were calling to share a recipe. She said, "Your father told me you offered to help. That is very kind. We appreciate it so much." I said, "I just do not want you stressed." She said, "Of course, and it is better this way. Megan does not need to feel guilty. She is working so hard. She would insist on doing something she cannot afford." I asked, "Do you want me to send it to you every month?" She said it would be easier if you could set up autopay, just for now. That way we do not have to talk about it all the time. The way she said it made the hairs on my arms lift, not because it was cruel, but because it was efficient. She was not asking for help. She was redesigning the system so it ran without conversation. I said, "Okay, I can do that." A week later, I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop and my bank app open. I added the mortgage servicer as a payee. I typed in the account number my father had emailed me. I set the payment date. I stared at the screen before I hit confirm. I told myself it was temporary. Temporary became routine. The payment went out every month, on the same day, the same amount. It became as automatic as my electric bill. By the end of 2019, I stopped noticing it unless something else was tight. By 2020, it was just another line item I did not talk about. Sometimes my father would say thank you in a vague way. He would mention being relieved, mention how expensive everything was, mention how proud he was of Megan. My mother never brought it up. Not directly. She would say things like, "We are doing okay now," and then change the subject. Or she would say, "It is nice not having to burden your sister." Like my silence was a gift to Megan, not to them. Meanwhile, at work, my life looked exactly the way my family liked to imagine it. Solid, predictable, not remarkable. I worked at a regional logistics company in Portland called Cascadia Freight Solutions. I was on the operations analytics team, which meant I lived in data and deadlines and the quiet stress of making sure mistakes did not become disasters. My director, Alan Pierce, trusted me. He came to my desk when a cost report did not balance or when a vendor contract got messy. He would say, "Laura, you are reliable. I can count on you." It was always reliable, never brilliant, never a rising star. Reliable was the word you used for a bridge that had never collapsed. It was not a compliment that got you remembered in a meeting. One afternoon in 2021, there was a major routing error that could have cost the company a six-figure penalty. I found it traced, it fixed it, and wrote a corrective plan before the next shipment went out. Alan patted the back of my chair and said, "Good catch. You saved us." Then at the team meeting, he thanked the group. The group. No names. I went home that night and saw the mortgage autopay confirmation in my notifications. I remember laughing quietly, not because it was funny, but because it was the same story in two different places. I held systems together, and the system acted like it was simply normal that I did. By 2022, I had made 36 consecutive mortgage payments. I knew the number because I counted them later when I needed the truth to be something more than a feeling. And then came that dinner the way my mother said Megan had helped them with the financial side, as if the house had been protected by Megan's brilliance instead of my bank account. Standing alone in my apartment after seeing that payment go through again, I opened my laptop and logged into my bank. I pulled up the payment history. Page after page of the same transaction, the same date, the same amount. I did not screenshot them yet. I did not print anything. I just looked at them until my eyes started to blur. My phone buzzed on the counter. A text from my mother. She wrote, "I hope you are not still upset. You know your sister did not mean anything by it. Do not make this a bigger deal than it needs to be. I stared at the message. My fingers hovered over the screen, but I did not answer. The part of me that always smoothed things over wanted to type something gentle. The part of me that had finally shifted stayed still. Instead, I opened a folder on my laptop and created a new file. I named it Mortgage. Then I started saving the confirmations one by one, not with anger, not with drama, but with a kind of clarity that felt like oxygen. I was not planning revenge, not yet. I was making sure the truth had somewhere to live. Chapter 3. The next few days felt strangely quiet, not because anything had improved, but because I stopped offering my usual little repairs. I did not send a follow-up text to my mother. I did not call my sister to smooth things over. I went to work, answered emails, sat through meetings, and came home to the steady hum of my apartment, like my life had 2 tracks running at once. On Thursday evening, my dad called. I let it ring twice before I answered, partly because I was tired, and partly because I wanted to hear him choose the words. He said, "Laura, it is Dad." I said, "I know." He paused. He said, "Your mom is upset." I said, "She hurt me." Another pause, heavier this time. He said, "I know. Your mother can be blunt. She does not always realize how things sound." I walked to the window and looked out at the parking lot below the wet shine of rain on pavement. My voice stayed even because if I let it shake, I knew he would hear it as weakness and start trying to fix my feelings instead of facing facts. I said she did realize. She just did not care. He exhaled slowly. He said, "You know, your sister has been under a lot of pressure. She has a big job. She is doing well. Your mom gets excited." I closed my eyes. I said, "Tell me the truth. Do you know I have been paying the mortgage?" There was a sound on the line like he shifted in his chair. I heard the small click of him setting something down, maybe his glasses on the table. He said yes. The word landed harder than I expected because it was so simple. No denial, no confusion, no pretending. I said, "How long have you known?" He cleared his throat. He said, "Since the beginning. Since we set it up." My hand tightened around my phone. I said, "Then why did you sit there and let them say Megan helped you financially?" He did not answer right away. He said, "Laura, you have to understand. Your mother worries about Megan. She always has. She thinks Megan carries the family name in a certain way. If she thought you were paying, she would feel like she failed Megan somehow." I laughed once, a short sound that surprised even me. I said, "She does not feel like she failed me, though." He went quiet. I could picture him at the kitchen table in that house, shoulders slightly hunched, eyes on the wood grain, as if it could give him an escape. He said, "You did not need us in the same way. You have always been capable. You always land on your feet. There it was, the oldest excuse in our family. You will be fine." I said, "Being capable does not mean being expendable." He said, "I am not saying that. I am saying, do not make this a war." I said, "You already did, Dad. You just did it quietly." He tried again, softer. He said, "What you have done for us matters. It does. Your mother and I appreciate it." I said, "Then say it, out loud, when it counts." He did not. He said, "Let me talk to your mom." I said, "She knows. She just likes the version where Megan looks like the hero." My dad's voice dropped lower. He said, "I did not want Megan to feel embarrassed." I felt my stomach twist. I said, "You were willing to embarrass me instead." He said, "No. It was not that." I said, "It was exactly that." We stayed in that silence for a few seconds, listening to each other breathe. Then he said the line I had heard my whole life. He said, "You are doing a good thing, Laura. Just do not make it bigger than it needs to be." When the call ended, I sat on the edge of my couch and stared at my living room wall, the framed print I had bought at a weekend market, the neat stack of mail I had not opened yet. My father knew. He had known for years, and he had still let that story stand at the dinner table because it was easier for everyone else. 2 weekends later, there was a family get-together at my Aunt Linda's house in Lake Oswego. It was not a holiday, not a birthday, nothing official. Just a Saturday afternoon with snacks and wine, and the kind of casual catching up that always turned into someone keeping score. I almost did not go, But I went because part of me wanted to see if the story had already spread. I wanted to know whether the dinner incident had been treated like a small blip or the beginning of something. Megan arrived late wearing a blazer like she had stepped out of a meeting. She kissed my mother on the cheek, hugged my dad, then came to me with a careful smile. She said, "Hey." I said, "Hey." Her eyes flicked to my face, checking for anger, for accusation. She said, "I did not know you were upset." I said, "You did not know because no one tells you anything that might make you uncomfortable." Her smile tightened. She said, "That is not fair." Before I could answer, my Aunt Linda clapped her hands to get everyone's attention. She had set out charcuterie boards and a tray of cookies, and she was buzzing with the energy of someone who loved hosting. She said, "I want to toast my niece. Megan is doing incredible. They are recognizing her at that big community fundraiser next month in Seattle. She is being honored for her leadership and for supporting family values. Can you believe it?" My mother's face lit up. She said, "I knew they would see her. I knew it." My Aunt Linda lifted her wine glass. She said, "And I have to say, it is not just her job. She has been such a rock for you two, helping with everything, even the house. Not many kids do that anymore. Some people do not support their parents at all. But Megan does." The room hummed with approving sounds. My mother smiled like she was glowing from the inside. My dad stared at the coffee table. Megan blinked quickly, and for a second I thought she might correct. It might say that was not true, might admit she did not pay a dime toward the mortgage. Instead, she glanced at my mother, then at my aunt, then back at me. Her mouth opened slightly, then closed. She did not say anything. My mother nodded. She said she has done so much. We are lucky. My father still said nothing. I felt something in my chest go numb. Not pain exactly, more like a final confirmation. This was not just silence. This was a choice. They were choosing the version of the story that made them feel good, and they were letting it stand because the truth would disrupt the hierarchy. I put my glass down. My Aunt Linda looked at me. She said, "Laura, you are quiet. Are you okay?" I forced a small smile. I said, "I am fine. Congratulations to Megan." Megan's cheeks flushed. After a few minutes, she followed me into the kitchen where I was pretending to look for a napkin. She kept her voice low. She said, "Why did you let her say that? Why did you sit there like that?" I turned to face her. I said, "You mean why did I not correct the lie for you?" Her eyes widened. She said, "I did not ask for that." I said, "You did not stop it either." She swallowed. She said, "I did help them. I helped with paperwork. I talked to the lender. I made calls. I said you helped with phone calls. I helped with money." Her voice sharpened. She said, "Are you trying to make me look bad?" I said, "I am not trying to make you look anything. I am letting you see what the story looks like from my side." She shook her head. She said, "This is insane. Why are you doing this now?" I said, "Because I am tired." She leaned closer, her voice controlled in the way lawyers learn to control their voices. She said, "You chose to do it. No one forced you." I felt my jaw clench. I said, "Do you hear yourself?" She looked away first, which told me more than any apology could have. That Monday, I took a half-day off work and met with a CPA named Daniel Price in an office downtown. He had been recommended by a woman in HR at my company, someone who had once whispered to me that I needed to protect myself more than I protected everyone else. Daniel was in his early 50s, calm, practical, the kind of person whose voice made everything sound like it had a solution. He asked me to walk him through the situation. I showed him the autopay history. I showed him the mortgage servicer statements. I told him who was on the loan and who owned the house. He nodded slowly. He said, "You are not on the deed." I said, "No." He said, "And there is no written agreement." I said, "No." He leaned back in his chair. He said, "Then you need to understand something. You have been making gifts, not investments. That means you have no automatic right to reimbursement. If your parents decided tomorrow that they owed you nothing legally, that could be the end of it." I stared at him. I said, "Even if I can prove I paid." He said, "Proof shows you paid, not why you paid. Courts care about intent. Without an agreement, a judge could see it as voluntary support. My throat went dry. He said, "I am not saying your parents would do that. I am saying you should stop assuming fairness is built into family arrangements. It is not. It has to be documented." I let that sit for a moment. I said, "So, what do I do?" He said, "You decide what boundary you want, then you put it in writing. Or you stop paying. But you cannot keep doing this in the shadows and expect it to protect you." On the drive home, I did not feel angry. I felt clear. My father had begged me not to make it bigger than it needed to be. My mother had built a story where my sister was the hero. My sister had let it happen because it benefited her. And now even a stranger in an office had confirmed what I already knew deep down. Silence did not keep the peace. Silence kept the system. That night my mother called and said the Seattle fundraiser would be a lovely trip, that the whole family should go, that it would mean so much to Megan. I listened, then said, "I will be there." My mother sounded relieved. She said, "Thank you. I knew you would do the right thing." I ended the call and sat on my couch looking at the folder on my laptop where the truth was saved. I was going to Seattle not to argue, not to beg anyone to understand me, but to watch what happened when the story they loved met the facts they avoided. Chapter 4. Seattle looked like polished steel under a thin March rain. All glass towers and wet sidewalks reflecting streetlights even in the early evening. My parents insisted we make it a family weekend. They booked a hotel near South Lake Union, close enough to walk to the fundraiser, close enough for my mother to make it feel like an event we were lucky to be included in. At breakfast, the morning of the gala, my mother was already rehearsing her smiles. "We need to be there early," she said, stirring her coffee like she was trying to smooth the surface. "Megan is being honored. People will want to meet us." My father nodded without looking up. "Your Aunt Linda is driving up from Portland," he said. Megan checked her phone and adjusted her blazer collar. "This is not a big deal," she said, but her voice was too controlled to be true. I watched them move through their roles the way they always had. Megan as the achievement, my mother as the proud curator of that achievement, my father as the quiet witness who called it peace, and me as the person who was expected to show up, clap, and not disrupt the story. The venue was a waterfront community hall renovated into something that looked expensive without feeling warm. Soft lighting, white tablecloths, a stage at the front with a screen hanging above it. Volunteers in matching badges moved between tables carrying clipboards. The sign at the entrance read Northwest Civic Leadership Gala. My mother squeezed my arm as we walked in. "Be pleasant," she whispered. I did not respond. I did not need to. A woman near the registration table looked up and waved when she saw me. "Laura, thank God," she said. She was about my age, early 40s, hair pulled back in a neat ponytail, the kind of calm expression you only get from managing chaos for a living. "I'm Sarah Kim," she said. "You are the finance person Diane mentioned, the one who understands spreadsheets." Megan's head snapped slightly toward my mother. My mother smiled too quickly. "I might have mentioned Laura is good with numbers," she said. "She works in logistics." Sarah exhaled like she had been holding her breath. "Can you help me for 10 minutes?" she said. "Our sponsor slides are a mess. Names, amounts, recognition levels. I do not want to embarrass anyone." I followed her toward a side room behind the stage, a small production area with laptops, cables, and a projector control panel. 2 volunteers sat hunched over a screen that showed a slideshow. I recognized Megan's headshot on one slide, her name in bold letters, her law firm listed beneath it. Sarah pointed at a table on the screen. "We have to run a transparency slide tonight," she said. "It is part of our donor agreement. We list major contributions and show where funds go. It is not dramatic, just basic accountability, but the numbers do not match what the treasurer sent me." She glanced at me. "I heard you do this kind of thing all day," she said. "Please tell me you can spot what I am missing." I sat down at the laptop. My hands did not shake. This was familiar ground numbers and dates and transactions that either matched or did not. "What file are you using for the sponsor ledger?" I asked. Sarah pulled up a folder on a shared drive. "This is the official one," she said. "I have edit access because I finalized the program. It is locked after tonight." I nodded. The spreadsheet had columns for sponsor names, tiers, and amounts. I scanned quickly and found the issue within minutes, a duplicate entry, an old draft not replaced. I corrected it and saved the file. Sarah leaned over my shoulder and let out a breath. "You just saved me," she said. I kept my voice neutral. "It was a version control problem." Sarah laughed once. "Story of my life," she said. "Listen, since you are here, can you help me with the transparency slide itself? We usually show a simple timeline of major commitments. It builds trust. People like seeing the reality behind the speeches." A timeline. I looked at Sarah, then at the screen where Megan's face waited in a polished frame. My mother had called my payments support. My father had called them a good thing. Megan had called them voluntary. None of them had called them what they were, the backbone of a narrative they had been using to praise the wrong person. I opened my laptop bag and pulled out a flash drive, not as a weapon, but as a tool. Everything was already organized. The confirmations, the dates, the amounts, 36 months of quiet. Sarah watched me. "What is that?" she asked. I paused, then spoke carefully. "I have a personal financial timeline that relates to my family," I said. "It includes documented payments for the mortgage on my parents' house. My sister is being recognized tonight for family values and support. If you are doing a transparency slide, I want the truth included." Sarah blinked, processing. "You mean you were the one paying?" she said quietly. I nodded once. Sarah looked toward the door, then back at me. "If you add this, it will be public," she said. "Not gossip public, on a screen, in front of everyone." "I know," I said. She hesitated. "I cannot let anyone use our stage to attack someone," she said. "I am not attacking," I said. "I am documenting, the way you said you needed to." Sarah studied my face, then the flash drive in my hand. "Is it real?" she asked. "It is bank confirmations and the loan servicer payee record," I said. "It is as real as it gets." She looked down at the spreadsheet again, then nodded slowly. "Okay," she said, "but it needs to be clean. Dates, totals, no commentary. If we do this, it has to look like transparency, not revenge." I almost smiled. "That is exactly what I want," I said. We built one slide, simple and brutal in its clarity. A timeline with monthly payment dates, a total at the bottom, and a line that read, "Mortgage payments processed from payer account holder Laura Bennett." No accusations, no adjectives, just facts. Sarah saved it into the transparency section of the deck, sandwiched between donor acknowledgments and the annual budget chart. It looked boring enough to be credible. That was the point. When we walked back into the hall, the room was filling with guests. My mother was already working the crowd, holding Megan's arm, introducing her to people in suits and cocktail dresses. "Laura," my mother called, smiling wide. "There you are. Come meet Mrs. Hargrove. She is on the board." I walked over and shook the woman's hand. Megan stood beside me, posture perfect, eyes bright. Mrs. Hargrove said, "We are so proud of you, Megan. Your mother told us you have been a pillar for your family." Megan's smile held. "Thank you," she said. "I do what I can." Her eyes flicked to me for a second, a quick glance like a warning. I kept my expression neutral. My father hovered near the edge of the group, holding a glass of water, like he wanted to be invisible. When the program began, the lights dimmed and the MC stepped onto the stage. People clapped at the right times. A video played showing community projects, smiling volunteers, a montage of good intentions. Then Megan's segment started. Her headshot filled the screen. Her name, her firm. Applause rose like a wave because people love a clean story. My mother clapped the loudest. Megan stood and gave a small, gracious nod, the kind she had practiced for years. The MC praised her leadership, her commitment, her dedication to family values. My mother's face shone. My father stared straight ahead. Then the slideshow moved forward into the transparency portion. The screen flickered briefly as the next slide loaded, and the timeline appeared. 36 lines of dates. The same payment amount, month after month, a total at the bottom that made the room go still. For a second, no one reacted because people had to read it twice to understand what they were seeing. Then someone near the back whispered loud enough to carry, "Wait, that is her daughter, Laura." A low ripple moved through the room. My mother's hand stopped mid-clap. She turned her head sharply toward the side of the stage where Sarah stood near the control table. Her voice cut through the quiet. "Stop that," she hissed. "Turn it off." Sarah did not move. My mother stepped toward the aisle. My father reached out instinctively, but he did not actually stop her. His fingers brushed her sleeve and fell away. Megan's face changed, the smile dropping as if someone had pulled a string. She leaned toward me, her voice tight. "You did this," she said. I kept my eyes on the screen. The MC hesitated, confused, then continued reading from the script, because that is what people do when something goes wrong in public. They cling to the plan. Megan grabbed my wrist. "You chose to pay," she said, her voice rising. "No one forced you. Why are you doing this here, in front of everyone?" My mother spun toward me. "What are you trying to prove?" she said. "This is not appropriate." My father stood halfway, then sat back down as if his legs could not decide what kind of man he wanted to be. The room buzzed louder now, guests murmuring, heads turning. Mrs. Hargrove looked from my mother to Megan to me, her expression sharpening with the kind of curiosity people try to hide. I stood up. The microphone was still on the stage stand. I walked to it without rushing. My heart was pounding, but my voice was steady. "I am not here to accuse anyone," I said. "I am here to correct a record." My mother shook her head fast, like she could deny me into silence. Megan whispered behind me, "Laura, stop, please." I looked out at the room. Faces I did not know. People who had been clapping for a story that was incomplete. "I made those payments," I said, "every month for 3 years. Not as a favor to be praised for, and not as a secret to be used as someone else's credit. I did it because my parents needed help, and no one asked me if I could keep doing it." My mother's eyes flashed. "You are humiliating your sister," she said. I turned slightly, just enough to include Megan in my peripheral. "I did not put her name on that slide," I said. "The truth did." Megan's voice broke through sharper now. "You are making me look like a liar." I kept my tone flat. "I am making the facts visible," I said. "There is a difference." I stepped back from the microphone and walked off the stage area. I did not wait for applause. I did not wait for anyone to respond. Behind me, my mother called my name loud and panicked. My father did not call at all. In the lobby, the sound of the fundraiser muffled behind closed doors. I pulled my coat on and zipped it up. My hands were cold, but they were not shaking. Outside, the rain had turned into a fine mist. I walked down the sidewalk toward the street, the city lights blurring in the wet air. My phone vibrated once, then again, but I did not check it. I kept walking until the noise inside my head finally quieted enough for me to hear my own breathing. Chapter 5. I stood there until the cold finally pushed me to move my breath, fogging the air as I crossed the street and hailed a ride back to the hotel. By the time I reached the lobby, my phone was vibrating non-stop in my coat pocket. I did not answer it. I rode the elevator up alone, closed the door to my room, and sat on the edge of the bed without turning on the lights. Sleep did not come easily that night, but when it did, it was heavy and dreamless. The next morning, the rain was gone. Sunlight cut through the clouds like the city had already moved on. The messages were waiting for me. My mother called first, then my father, then my sister, then my aunt. Voicemails stacked up in neat rows, each one more urgent than the last. I let them sit for most of the morning while I showered, packed, and checked out. It was my father I called back first, not because he deserved it more, but because I knew he would speak carefully. He answered on the second ring. He said, "Claire." I said, "I am heading home." There was a pause. He said, "Your mother is beside herself. She feels blindsided." I said, "She has known for years." He did not argue that. He said, "She wants to fix this." I said, "Fixing it means telling the truth, not rearranging it." He sighed. He said, "We want to make things right. We can change the paperwork. We can put something in writing. We never meant for it to look like you were being taken advantage of." I leaned against the window and looked out at the city people already rushing through their Sunday routines. I said it did not look like it. It was. He did not interrupt. I said, "I am done paying the mortgage. That ended last night." His voice tightened. He said, "We cannot afford to lose that support." I said, "That is not my responsibility anymore." Another pause, longer this time. He said, "Can we talk when you get back? All of us." I thought about the table in that house, the way silence had been used as glue, the way I had been expected to hold things together without being seen. I said, "We can talk, but not about going back to how things were." He said, "Okay." When I hung up, I felt something loosen in my chest. Not relief exactly. Clarity. My sister called next. I let it go to voicemail twice before answering. She said my name immediately, her voice sharp with panic. She said, "What were you thinking?" I said I was thinking that I was done pretending. She laughed, a short sound edged with disbelief. She said, "You humiliated me." I said I corrected a record. She said, "You could have done it privately." I said I tried. For years. She went quiet. Then she said, "You chose to help. No one forced you. You cannot just decide later that it was wrong." I closed my eyes. I said, "Choosing once does not mean choosing forever, and choosing in silence does not mean consenting to being erased." She exhaled hard. She said, "Mom is talking about redoing everything, putting something official together. We can say it was a misunderstanding." I said it was not. She said, "What do you want?" The question surprised me, not because it was hard, but because it was the first time she had asked it. I said, "I want it to stop. I want you to stop being credited for something you did not do. I want them to stop relying on me without acknowledging it, and I want to decide what I give without being pressured." She did not answer right away. She said, "I did help. I made calls. I talked to people." I said, "You helped. You did not pay." Her voice dropped. She said, "Are you going to cut us off?" I said, "I am going to stop carrying this alone. That is not the same thing." She hung up without saying goodbye. When I got back to Portland that evening, my apartment felt different. Quieter, but not empty. I unpacked slowly, washed my clothes, made a simple dinner. The mortgage payment date came and went without a transaction notification. For the first time in 3 years, my account stayed untouched. A week later, my parents came to see me. They sat on my couch like guests, not owners of the space. My mother kept smoothing her sweater eyes, darting around as if looking for something she had lost. She said, "We never wanted you to feel unappreciated." I said, "Then you should have appreciated me." She flinched. She said, "We are willing to put everything in writing, reimburse you over time, whatever it takes to make this right." I listened. I did not rush to reassure her. I said, "I am not asking for reimbursement. I am asking for boundaries." My father nodded slowly. I said, "I am not paying the mortgage anymore. I am not managing your finances. I am not keeping secrets so someone else can look better. If you need help, you ask. If I say no, that is the answer." My mother's eyes filled with tears. She said, "You are being harsh." I said, "I am being clear." Silence settled between us, different from the silence before. This one did not demand anything from me. At work, things shifted in quieter ways. A month after the gala, my manager, Aaron, called me into his office. He closed the door and gestured for me to sit. He said, "I have been reviewing the logistics audit from last quarter, the one you put together." I nodded. He said, "I want you to present it to the leadership team next week. They need to hear it from you." It was not a promotion. There was no announcement. But it was recognition, direct and unmistakable. I said, "Okay." When I walked back to my desk, I realized something else had changed. I was no longer doing things just because I could. I was choosing where my effort went. The family calls did not stop overnight. There were awkward dinners, careful conversations, moments where my mother slipped back into old patterns and I stopped her. Each time I did it got a little easier. I did not lose my family. I lost the role I had been trapped in. I did not get those years back. The money was gone. The time was gone. But something else had returned to me. My voice. If you are listening to this and it feels familiar, if you have ever been the person who held everything together while someone else got the credit, I want to ask you something. How long have you been staying quiet to keep the peace? And what has that silence been costing you? Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is stop carrying what was never meant to be yours alone.